So as you know, today we have a very special speaker, Natan Sharansky, who's the chair of ISGAP, which is a tremendous honor for the ISGAP team that Natan is with us. And before I introduce Natan, I also want to introduce Avital Sharansky, Natan's wife. And I remember, and many of us who know from the struggle for Soviet Jewry, Avital was the voice not only for Natan when he was in prison, but really for the struggle for the rights of Jewish people and Soviet citizens in those days, and was really a voice for defending Jewish people and Jewish culture with an amazing dignity. So we're honored that you're here. So thank you for being here. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce you to Natan, who's the chair of ISGAP, and as many of you know, was the voice for the dissident movement in the former Soviet Union and for the freedom of Jewish people and the rights of Jewish people. And he, as you know, paid for his convictions and didn't allow a tyrannical, powerful regime to change his convictions, and he served in prison and then was freed and moved to Israel, immediately moved to Israel in a very dramatic moment, not only in the life of the Sharanskys, but I think in the life of the Jewish people. And Natan went on to become a leader in Israel and served in various Israeli governments and various ministerial positions, and then was the head of the Jewish Agency. And then he stepped up to become the chair of ISGAP. So today, and Natan has written widely on many issues of Jewish people and in culture, and also a very important work on anti-Semitism. And today he's going to address us on issues of anti-Semitism in the contemporary context. So Natan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll try to speak about contemporary context, but of course, without looking on what happened, at least in the last 40 years, it was difficult. And we are speaking about anti-Semitism. We always have to remember that anti-Semitism has many faces. Usually it's changing with the changing of Jewish identity, or as people feel what is the central component of our identity, and that's where anti-Semitism usually moves. When it was mainly religion, because there was religious anti-Semitism in the first, not in the first 1,000 years of Christianity, and in different other forms, when nationalism became fashionable. And in the 19th century, anti-Semitism attacked the nationalism, nation, race of Jews. And when an important part of Jewish identity became Israel, so in fact, anti-Zionism became a modern anti-Semitism. And at this very moment, anti-Semitism grows on the left and on the right, and in the Western Europe and in the Eastern Europe, in different forms. And we have always, we have to remember also that it is easily moving and is adopted. Different types of anti-Semitism are adopted by different groups. So if we are not challenging anti-Semitism simultaneously on all the fronts, it's become fruitless. And that's exactly the challenge of today. Well, let's start from a thing that happened only a few weeks ago. Milun Kotari, there is United Nations, and there is Human Rights Committee of United Nations, and this committee created the Commission of the Inquiry of the root causes of the violence between Israel and Palestinians. And it's a very special commission because it's not limited. New York, it can work for 20 years, for 50 years. And he is one of 3 members, respectable member from India. And some time ago, a few weeks ago, he was giving an interview. And there he said, practically in the same paragraph, he said 2 things. That the Jewish lobby controls the social media, and that he doesn't understand why, with its record, Israel is the member of the United Nations from 193 countries. I have to say that it was immediately protested by the representatives of Britain and Germany and France and United States of America, and 3 days ago he sent the letter of apology to the head of the Human Rights Committee. So, and I'm not now even going to discuss how sincere this apology, and let's give him credit. At least he apologized. It's not really happening regularly with politicians. It doesn't happen at all with journalists sometimes. But it's not about it. He writes that how he didn't think well, how he's sorry, saying automatically. But the fact that, I think in fact, he presented by his remarks a very powerful idea, because it's very unique that in one paragraph you can say one of the oldest theories of anti-Semitism, that Jews control the world, Jews control finances, Jews control the media, and now, of course, social media. And if you go to the Elders of Zion, the book of Elders of Zion, Protocols of Elders of Zion, written by Tsarist police, or how many, it's probably 150 years ago, or if you go even older, and definitely Nazi propaganda, this thesis of classical anti-Semitism that Jews control the world is basic. At the same time, and he said there something which characterizes new anti-Semitism. It could not be ancient. You need Israel for this. And Israel is singled out from 193 members of the United Nations, and why it is there? No, not China, who keeps 5 million Uyghurs in awful prison, and not Cambodia, which killed half of this population, and not Syria, and we all know what's happened and happening in Syria, and not any other country. Why Israel? So singling out Israel, it's a definite sign of this new anti-Semitism. And he shows the connection. In fact, he said that we have the second one because it is very difficult for us to work because there is the first one. So connection between old and new anti-Semitism, connection which is so strongly denied today, is very obvious. And the fact that he said it automatically without thinking, and as he himself explains, it's only strengthens the point. Because, well, I'll give you an example from my different life. In prison, my closest friend became, and we are keeping in contact until now, Christian activist Vladimir Porush. And he was relatively young, we all young ones, and he was rather enlightened as a Christian activist, and he was publishing some magazine, Open Christianity, and for this he was put in prison. And it was very interesting for us to talk and to become together in our fighting against KGB. But while we were telling to one another about different holidays and so on, and I was speaking with him about Seder Pesach. How you say in English, Seder Pesach? Passover Seder, yeah. He said, "Oh yeah, I know. It's you are celebrating it at the time of Last Supper, and really, if you think it's Easter and Passover, and you're drinking red wine because of the blood of Christ." So I was a little bit shocked, and I said, "Do I look like the one who's drinking blood of Christ?" He said, "No, of course not, but 400 years, 500 years, probably it was like this." And then I said, "Do you know that Seder Pesach probably is 1,000 years older than Last Supper?" So for 1,000 years, we people didn't know that there is Christ, and they were drinking red wine. So I want to say that was the beginning of conversation, and then, of course, he knew everything correctly, but simply the fact that it was so natural, he didn't want to insult me. It only shows how deep were the prejudices. And the same here, the fact that he said it, if you read or even watch him, he said it very naturally without thinking about it, and he is Indian human rights activist. So it simply shows how this connection between all the theories about Jewish power and today's choosing Israel for the world, how it's naturally connected. So for those of us who are from the former Soviet Union, or those who are old enough to remember Soviet Union, there is nothing new. In Soviet Union, well, I was born in 1948, so I grew as a boy in the 50s. That was the biggest and last campaign of Stalin, and then after he died, others, against Jewish culture, Jewish intelligentsia, when all the Jewish poets and Jewish theater were simply shot dead, and when the Jews were fired. That was the beginning of strong discrimination of Jews. At the same time, it was a time when Soviet Union was among the first who recognized Israel, hoping that Israel will become their tool to fight Britain. And then immediately after this, they saw that it's very independent, and not only independent, fighting with pro-Soviet regimes, and so it became a target. And in Soviet press, there was really no difference. There was published this awful cartoons where Jews were taken straight from Nazi propaganda, but they were presenting Zionists, big Zionists, I say this awful enemy, octopus, yeah? And it goes straight to the fifth column, to these Jews, and those are called nationalists, those are called cosmopolites, but it's all one big world. And when the anti-Zionist campaign was beginning, every Jew who had no idea what Israel is in trouble. He will be discriminated. And vice versa, they're speaking about Jews as agents of Zionism, and it was very natural. Even later, already in the 70s, 20 years later, I'm in prison, and I am accused for human rights and Zionist activity, and as an unofficial spokesman of our movement, my natural partners were American journalists and American diplomats who were helping us to keep contact with all the world. And in my case, in order to show how it's all one big Zionist plot, and they have character references from KGB on all these people. And there is character reference on David Shipper from New York Times, and it is written there that he's Jewish. And they know very well that he's not. And there is character reference on Robert Toss from Los Angeles Times, and it is written that he's Jewish. And he's not. So you have to understand, it's KGB, it's, well, awful organization, but on basic facts, they're trying to be true. But it is so important that Zionist plot and Jews all over the world are one part of it. And even more, like my main accomplice was Scoop Jackson, the Democratic Senator Jackson, who was the first who linked human rights and foreign policy, and who said without free immigration there will be no free trade. And he was our big hero. It was written in my case that he's also Jewish, and everybody knows it's nonsense. But it was so important to build this connection between Zionist plot and Jewish world that they did. More than this, at some moment, they collected, like, there were 51 volumes in this case, so they had to fill it with a lot of information. One of 100 pages were the letters of Soviet citizens who are protesting against Zionist propaganda. And they put these letters in the case, and during the court I said, what better proof we need that there is anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union? Because all these letters were about how Jews are controlling the world, how Jews are destroying us from inside, and how Jews are loyal to Israel. So you see the voice of people that Zionism and Jews are the same, and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, it goes together. So when you're coming from the Soviet Union, you understand automatically those are the same. And you understand why, because dictators always need external enemy in order to mobilize people to the fight, because people depend from them. And they need an internal enemy in order to have strong repression inside the country. These are the two tools of dictators. It's mobilizing people against external enemy and repressing people because of internal enemy. And so Jews were ideal. They are at the same time, they are internal and external enemies. So you don't need to have too many. You have how to say, 2 for 1 price. Yeah, that's what you have. Yeah, no, 1 for 2, no, whatever. You'll finish the comparison. So now I'm coming to the free world, and of course, if it is connected with dictators, so thanks God, I'm now in free world, enjoying so. And then the time when I'm already in the government, and one of the topics that I was responsible was also relations with the Jewish diaspora and fight against anti-Semitism. And in 2000 there is Durban Conference, which for a few years was prepared by United Nations and the first conference against global racism. And there are so many topics which have to be addressed. Racism is a really awful crime, and we have to overcome it. And then it turned only in one topic. It's the crimes of Israel against Palestinians. And it was very sad for me because, well, in 1975, there was a resolution in the United Nations that Zionism is racism. And I was in Moscow, but at least at that moment, all the free world was against it. It is the Soviet Union and allies and some fascist regimes in the Third World, they were those who were for this. This time, so many leaders in the free world, in one or another way, directly or indirectly, supported the agenda. And then we have, almost immediately after this, we have so-called Second Intifada, when every month hundreds and hundreds of Israelis are killed because of suicide bombing. And I'm in the government, and we have to take some very dramatic decisions, especially after one Seder Pesach, 30 people at the table of Seder Pesach were killed, and that month 150 people were killed. So no country can stand against this. So we decided to send troops in those centers from which terrorists are coming, and Jenin was the center. And then all the night was debate, and it was decided unanimous, and it was unity government, so they were from all the sides. And it was decided that when we go there, we are not using tanks, we are not using aviation, we go house to house. And we are accused for this, because it means that our soldiers will be killed because we don't want more victims. And then there was a battle in Jenin, and we are accused that that's the worst massacre after the Second World War. In this battle, 43 Palestinians were killed, 23 of them were terrorists, and 20 from this population, 26 Israeli soldiers were killed. So we were accused by Israelis, by many Israelis, that 26 soldiers were killed because you didn't want to use a more powerful weapon. And after all, what is the proportion of killing? You kill 23 terrorists, you kill 20 civilians, and 26 of our people. At the same time, and Palestinians say that there were thousands buried alive and so on. Of course, like a week after this, not a one was, and so on. It's clearly a lie. And suddenly we see what starts all over in the free world, not among the terrorists, and how we are accused before even checking anything in all awful things. And then there is, and I know I wasn't the government, I wasn't this decision, so it's not that I was in prison hoping that something is different. And here I see the cartoon which is published in Independent, and cartoon is Ariel Sharon eating Palestinian kids, the blood is dropping from his mouth, and he says, what's the problem? You didn't see politicians kissing kids? And Ariel Sharon is there straight from those awful cartoons of Soviet times, which is straight from the Sturmer, or whatever it was the name. So I say that is anti-Semitism, so obviously connected. And I speak to the cartoonist in Britain. I came to Britain. I speak to he says, "What a nonsense! I disagree. Maybe you agree, but I disagree with the policy of Israeli government, and that's how I express it." Then British Union of Journalists give to this the best cartoon of the year and some special prize. And they say it's legitimate criticism of Israel. And then European Union gives it the best cartoon of the year in Europe. Then comes the Nobel Prize winner in literature, Samarango, I think, yeah. And he says on the press conference, "I was in Palestinian refugee camp. That is Auschwitz of today." You understand, I was a number of times in Palestinian refugee camp. I think it's a real disgrace that fifth generation of Palestinians lives in refugee camps. And we can argue who has to be blamed, why it is, and there is a whole story there behind it. But even the worst Palestinian camp that I was cannot be compared to Soweto, and I was independent national observer of the elections, Soweto. Nothing to compare with Auschwitz. What it has to do with Auschwitz? And again, when I speak about it, that's criticism of Israel. What do you want? And so on and so on. There were many other examples. That's when I said that we do need to find the way how to separate between legitimate criticism of Israel, even illegitimate. What is criticism of Israel? Israel should be open to criticism as everybody in free world. And clear anti-Semitism, clear connection between this criticism of Israel and classical anti-Semitism. And that's how this 3D were born. Well, I'll tell you frankly that the idea from which it was born somehow didn't catch. The idea was that when you come to the cinema of 3D film and you don't put the spectacles, 3D spectacles, you will not understand what's happening. Yeah? The moment you put the 3D spectacles, suddenly you see that is the man, that is the horse. So I said, I want to apply the same principle to anti-Semitism. What are the tools of classical anti-Semitism? Let's forget about the new ones. The clear tool is demonization. See, Camus once said that for anti-Semite, Jew is the closest to Satan. And really, if you look at the good old days of the first centuries of Christianity, well, even before Christianity, but definitely all that blood libel, all this accusation that Jews were poisoning the wells, and many other, Jews were really, what is delegitimization? When something absolutely absurd is said, and it's very frightening, and there is no truth in it. If you go to, there is a lot of examples of delegitimization of Jews. So I was saying, let's look at today's world and about Israel. When such cartoon, or it's told that refugee camp is Auschwitz, that is the closest to Satan. The closest to this symbol of Satan is Auschwitz. So you're comparing it with this. And later in Haiti, there was awful earthquake in Haiti, and Israeli team was the first who came. And such a rare thing, I'm an American, I see on CNN, big article, very positive about Israel, and accusation, how it is that our government, we are just now near Haiti, we couldn't be there and have this hospital to save so many people. And then on one internet, somebody on the internet puts, but you know why soldiers came? They are harvesting the organs of the people in order to sell them. The Israeli soldiers are harvesting the organs. You can say, what nonsense, and there's any such thing, it does need to be even denied. Then I think that today more people in the world believe that it was less than the opposite. And there was special request in Bundestag and in a British Parliament from, I don't know, one or two members on the right, but there was asked to investigate this case. That's, well, the demonization of our time, times when really awful thing happened with the death of George Floyd, Floyd, yeah. And the anger was sincere, and demonstrations were sincere. And by the way, most of the Jews participated in this demonstration. Somehow, out of the blue, there comes that American police goes every year to Israel to learn how to treat black people. It's called Deathly Encounter. That was well, by the way, I checked, really, every year there is a delegation of American police in Israel. On their request, like 15 years ago, they're coming to learn how to fight terrorism. Because for good and for bad, Israel has unbelievable experience, and that's all. So it has nothing to do with this. Nevertheless, those of you who are connected to campuses in America probably know how Deathly Encounter became a very popular thing. It makes many Jews who were active in these demonstrations feel embarrassed, feel distancing from Israel, and so on. That's typical demonization of today. So I was saying that if we see demonization, we have to know that it goes straight from classical antisemitism. Another idea is for delegitimization. Well, those who know the Christian theory know that there was a replacement theory, which started really, I don't remember, Augustine, or like 5th century or so. So the moment a Christian church became victorious, became the official one, there was a replacement that Jews are suffering because they didn't disappear. They had to accept Christianity. So Paul told them, accept Christianity. They didn't. And so now they are not a legitimate religion. And of course it continued almost to modern times. Then there was the period when it became a nation. It was denied then a nation. Well, Stalin had the whole article that Jews are not a nation. And there is a lot about it, how Germans didn't deny the Nazis. To the contrary, they were saying that it's inferior. No, that it's under nation. It's less than nation. Inferior, yeah. So if you look on Israel, well, just now we heard how Israel doesn't have the right to be the member of the United Nations, that Israel is the only nation that there is question which is raised all the time, whether it has the right to exist. Look at the last report of Amnesty International. It doesn't say like so clearly, but it speaks about apartheid, and it recognizes that it's not really apartheid, but we believe that this phenomena can be called apartheid. First of all, it's demonization. We don't have to deny it. And second, the question said whether it was so from the very beginning, and so whether it was legitimate, whether Zionism was legitimate. So it's in a very sophisticated way. You have to really to read it very carefully in order to understand that, in fact, that is the way of delegitimizing the idea of Zionism. Well, today with the progressive movement, it's very simple. It's racist, white supremacy. I always have difficulty with this word. Colonial settler theory, which has no right to exist. But that's direct continuation of delegitimization. And then double standard, that's the most broad phenomena in Jewish history. We were judged by double standard. We were the only who were expelled practically every country in Europe, or every county in Germany has its own history, how for 50 years only Jews were expelled, then they were permitted. And of course, I have at home the laws over 300 years of Tsars Romanov, there are more than 900 laws where there is different standard for Jews. Jews have to pay different taxes, they have different rights to live, they have different restrictions on getting education. So and it's a law. Well, in the Soviet Union it wasn't the law, but everybody knew if it is written in your ID, Jew, you're judged by very different standards when you go to work and to study. And if you look at Israel, this double standard, once I went to Geneva, to Human Rights Committee, like 18 years ago, what was the name? The head of it was very, very respectable person. She was leading lawyer in Canada. What's her name? Yeah, Louis Harbour. Yeah, and really I saw about her great things, and I really appreciate it. But I told her, look, as a lawyer, as a judge, as an outstanding human rights specialist, don't you feel uncomfortable that you're the head of the committee where there is only one topic permanent? They are coming and going different, but one permanent, just at the time when there is war in Chechnya, at the time it was awful war, and in Darfur, and many other, well, I'm not speaking about China and so on, and that is the only question. So, and she said, you are absolutely right. Listen, she said, but what can I do? I'm not the one who is defining. And there is agreement between Russia and the Arab countries that Chechnya is not brought and Darfur is not brought. And there is agreement between this. And she gave me the map of agreements between different countries not to bring practically any serious conflict. And about Israel, there is no agreement. And I said, even if it is very logical, I read the conference, press conference, not press conference, conversation between the Minister of Education of Russian Tsar in 1916, the time of war, with a group of the most distinguished Jews who came that they will make huge donation to Russian army, huge, unbelievable, more than the capital of Russia, but they asked for this to cancel restrictions on Jews. And he was explaining in a very logical way, by the way, why he cannot do it in the interest of Russian people. I said, but it doesn't mean anything different that there is double standard for Jews and non-Jews. What you're explaining is very logical, but it means that for Israel it's another standard. If the only country that they can agree to bring it to the agenda, it means that Israel is judged by very different standard. And of course, we have a lot of examples of this until this day. Very tragic and sad story. Shirin Abu Akleh, just recently, months ago, 2 months ago, Al Jazeera correspondent in Israel was killed in the crossfire. And you have to understand that in the last time, 12 Israeli citizens were killed by terrorists who came in the centers of 4 different cities and started shooting. And these terrorists, well, they were all killed. But in the meantime, there was an investigation. All those who sent them were in Jenin. And after our intelligence found out, they went to arrest them. At this time, there was cross-fighting. And Al Jazeera journalist was killed in this cross-fighting. And Israel, in the end, is accused in deliberately killing it. And you know how many journalists were killed in the last 30 years? Until 2,658. Including recently Fox journalist in Ukraine. And the whole day Fox was speaking about it, one day. About all the others, even less. There was no investigations. Here, all the leading New York Times and the Washington Post organizing special investigation. Then Secretary of State Blinken says, yes, we have no choice, we'll have to make investigation. And Atlantic magazine and are comparing it with the killing of Khashoggi and Daniel Pearl. I don't have to remind you how was killed Daniel Pearl in the front of the camera, and then his body cut in 10 pieces, and how Khashoggi was killed in Turkey's embassy, and leading liberal journalists are doing it. And if you look at the fight of these 2,658, by the way, it's Mike Lauren got all this information, not me. So it's clear it's different standard. That was the idea of my series, yeah. And I have to say that there some Jewish organizations like Hillel or IDL immediately adopted it, but there was a lot of also criticism that it's really restricting our freedom of speech. And then the debate continued, and then 10 years later, IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, yeah. They passed definitions. Interesting that even a Holocaust survivors organization really then made a consensus agreement where there is definition of anti-Semitism, and then they didn't want to go into all this debate. They said, and here are typical examples when criticism of Israel becomes anti-Semitic. If you look at these examples, they are all about delegitimization, demonization, and double standard. And they write about it very clearly. Good. We have international definition. The other organizations that I'm connected combat anti-Semitism. It's not organization, it's movement. They every 2 weeks they report about another group which got this definition. It's good, or some state in the United States. President Trump accepted it. Then of course it was criticized, but then President Biden accepted it, and it was already greeted. So everything was good. There is permanent attacks on the, well, there was another definition that invented, it's called Jerusalem Declaration, though it was all on Zoom, but very clever called Jerusalem Declaration. If you see what is the difference is attempt to take Zionism out of it. And a really funny example, one day the one who was responsible for anti-Semitism at Trump administration, Clark. Elon Clark, yeah. He calls me, we are speaking on different topics, and he says to me with excitement, yesterday we signed agreement with Bahrain that we will fight together, we are both committed to fight anti-Semitism on the basis of international definition. And I meet a few days after this delegation from Bahrain in Israel, and I ask them, but you understand that on the basis of international definition means that you have to fight against anti-Zionism? They said, of course we understand. If you are going now to build a different life in the Middle East, why should we be interested that somebody will be delegitimizing Israel? At that very day that I spoke to Elon Clark, I received information from my friend from San Francisco that Central Jewish Organization in San Francisco decided they cannot support this definition because it restricts the freedom of speech. The fear that it restricts the freedom of speech is very big. And in fact, if you think to the contrary, it really gives you opportunity to criticize Israel without being afraid to be accused in anti-Semitism. I did such an experiment with my students in Shalem Center. I said, well, some of them, of course, have a lot of criticism. I say, try to express what you just now said about Israel without demonizing Israel and without delegitimizing, without denying its right to exist, and trying to put the same standards which will put to America or to Syria when you're criticizing. And you know, everybody could do it. And it's so good, and then you're not accused of anti-Semitism with all your criticism. So it's such a hypocrisy to say that that's what restricts the freedom of speech. Now, if you go to today's world, it's even more difficult. Why? Because, as I said at the beginning, anti-Semitism is growing on both sides. And polarization on both sides is awful, and the right doesn't speak to the left. And when we see Jews will not replace us, you remember where it was, yeah? Jews will not replace us. They, of course, they will not speak with those who say the Jews are those who brought slaves to America. And you will think it's almost the same slogan, yeah? But that is extreme right and that's extreme left. And those saying that slavery existed because of Jews, they were merchants, and they are saying the Jews are those who are now bringing all these Mexicans here and depriving us jobs. And these are on the far left, well, not far left, but that's Black Lives Matter, or left part of Black Lives Matter, and these are on the far right, yeah? And that's a big problem, because they will not talk to one another, and they're saying the same thing. Well, in general, I have to say a few words about progressive movements. If you take a critical race theory and replace the word race with the word class, you'll get pure Marxism-Leninism, which we started in the Soviet Union. Simply reading the text, the world is divided on privileged and unprivileged. Privileged are always wrong, unprivileged are always right. You should not permit to unprivileged speak because it insults political non-correct, it insults those who are suffering. And that's exactly the world in which I grew on. They were capitalists and proletarian. And in this world, when in this world Israel becomes privileged and Jews become privileged and Palestinians are privileged, there is nothing to talk about. You cannot be right. So, and that's why all this BDS and deadly encounter, it's on one hand, and these Jews will not replace us. Let's again suddenly see how Jews are at the same time internal enemy and external enemy. So we are going back to Soviet times. And now, as I said, there is no difference between Jews will not replace us and Jews are responsible for slavery. I'll give you almost what appeared almost simultaneously in the press, and you'll tell me who's left and who's right. There was a joke on Twitter about what is the difference between Jews and pizza. Pizza goes out of oven. At the same time, one politician, a young politician, was greeted with the shout, "Fire up the oven." Yeah. So the first one is BDS supporter. The other one is neo-Nazi. They're saying the same, you see. Now another, what Photoshop where a Jewish journalist is put in a Nazi uniform. And there was a mock album of singer Adele called the Adolf Hitler. Again, the one is all-right supporter of Trump, and the other is Students for Justice in Palestine. And you see, they're doing absolutely the same thing. They are comparing Jews with Nazis. So there's really no difference. And one goes to the other. You know, like a few weeks ago, BDS Boston published mapping. What is mapping? They say they published a document, Zionist politics and the purpose, I don't remember. But they put a map, and you have to know your enemies, Zionism. You have to know your Zionist enemies. And there on this map, there are a Jewish Federation of Boston, and there are Jewish schools, and there are Jewish hospitals. And so, and J Street is there. So it's like KGB. You see, we have so many different Jewish groups who are fighting with one another. In my case, in KGB, they were all on one list. So you speak anti-Zionism, but you mean, in fact, anti-Jewish. You are putting everybody there. So if it is so similar, it must be very easy to attack both of them. Look at the I think it was second debate between Biden and Trump. And the moderator, Wallace, I think from Fox, I think, he asked them to condemn racism, anti-Semitism, and so on. And Trump said it all comes from the left. And Biden said it all comes from the right. And they were like Proud Boys and Antifa. Yeah? And both sides were ready to criticize the other. Trump was pushed. So Proud Boys, what you can say to Proud Boys? Journalist was pushing him. And he said, Proud Boys, stand aside. That was maximum he was ready to say. And Biden said, Antifa, its own idea, what we were talking about. All the racism is from the right. So if it is the leaders, are not, politicians, are not ready to criticize anti-Semitism in their camp and racism. So on the lower level, I saw it all the time, heard it practically for every comparison which I made between left and right. I heard immediately, on the left I heard, how you can justify or compare us with those killers who go in Pittsburgh, other places, and are killing people. And what? The left is killing people. And those on the right are saying, how you can compare these lonely wolves, who are there? Nobody supports them. And BDS movement and all this organizers, all the money is there. So instead of being so angry, it's so easy to agree that after all, we have the same enemy, the same prejudice in different camps. Let's fight them together. And it's not happening. It's dividing Jewish world, it's dividing political world. Everybody is ready to fight anti-Semitism in the camp of our opponents. And as you understand, it gives nothing. Why should supporters of Trump be concerned that Biden supporters are criticizing them, and vice versa? So the idea is to attack on all the fronts. And that's why it is so important, the seminar, where we are really trying, or Charles, and call it over to Charles, he's doing it for many years already. And by the way, I agreed to be the chairman of ISGAP when I came first to such seminar, and I saw how important it is. That we have to see all the phases of anti-Semitism, and then we have to bring it into academia. If you cannot bring it to our presidents, at least in academia, that students will hear and understand. Thank you.
And others give me thank you very much. I'll start off with a quick question.
Yeah.
So, when there's a struggle to free Soviet Jewry, it really galvanized the Jewish community in the world. In North America, the Americas, Europe, Israel, everybody was, I guess, united fighting for the freedom of Soviet Jews. And we helped to fight the anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union. And there's an irony, every generation they rise up against the Jewish people. And now we fast forward a generation, and you and other people who were in the former Soviet Union are now helping us to fight anti-Semitism in the West, which is, in a very short period of history, things seem to be flipping. And when you spoke, and I won't go into all the details, but it also resonated that when you spoke to the people in Bahrain, the delegation from Bahrain, and you spoke about, they signed the IRA definition, and you asked them, well, are you going to also fight anti-Zionism, and they said, of course. And I think the region is becoming more aware of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which is refreshing. But at the same time, the Jewish community in San Francisco condemned Israel and distanced themselves from connecting anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. In the former Soviet Union, when the regime was putting a lot of pressure on the Jewish people, the community was fractured to some extent. Some Jewish people wanted to assimilate into Soviet society and to have a calmer life. And there were people fighting for Jewish rights, but there were people that were assimilated into the Soviet culture. Do you see any connection now in the West, and particularly in the United States, with massive levels of assimilation? And Ben gave an amazing presentation on the internalization of anti-Semitism and the lack of pride that the Jewish community has in the West. Do you see the fracturing of American Jewry in a similar way, and it's a strong statement to make, that was happening in the Soviet Union?
No. Okay. Well, there are so many questions inside. I have to give another lecture. But in general, I with all my criticism of what's happening in America, it's happening in the free country, and it's people are having the free choice between left and right, and there are many illusions, of course, but it's their free choice. In Soviet Union, I've already lived under the fear. I compared progressives and Marxism. Nobody in my days really believed in Marxist theory because it brought to killing of so many people, and it was imposed on people. Progressive theories are not imposed on people. They want to believe, like probably in the first years of Marxism, or the first Bolsheviks. So I lived at the time when nobody really believed in this ideology, but everybody was scared and afraid. And with all our divisions, our fear was united, one. And we had many different Jewish organizations in America, split between themselves, who didn't trust one another, who felt that the other is betraying the cause, but they were all united in the idea that saving Soviet Jewry is more important than our divisions. And KGB was proving it by putting all of them on one list. Today, and that is the problem, that anti-Semitism always was uniting us. Today, anti-Semitism, because of having these two faces, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, is dividing us because people believe that the winning of their political camp is more important. Then we will deal, when our camp wins, there will be no anti-Semitism. That's people believe, and that makes it much more difficult. That short answer. There are many others inside.
So I hope we'll have the opportunity to have a conversation, because I'll tell you one thing. We gave a lecture on Edward Said's notion of replacement theory. And he said that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, and that Said, and that the Jewish intellectuals were in the suburbs of America, getting fat. 1 minute.
And what Chomsky was not a Jewish intellectual for him.
No, I know. But just to finish the point, just to finish the point of replacement theory, because I think this is very important, and I think it's important to what we're doing here, is that he then went on to say that the Jews are the Nazis and the Palestinians are the Jews.
Yeah.
And this is the ideology that is being imposed on students and faculty. This is the religion of academia. And I actually think, like the Soviet Union to an extent, that this ideology is being imposed on Jewish faculty and Jewish students, and if you don't follow the religion, it's a problem. So anyway,
that's a problem. That's another problem. Yeah.
Ben.
Hi, Mr. Sharansky. So I quote your article, The Un-Jews, in my new book about internalized anti-Jewishness. And in my work I offer my own solutions to this specific problem. I'm wondering how you think we actively combat it, this idea of the Un-Jews.
Well, for those who don't know, Gil and Troy and myself wrote a book where we are trying to present the tent of those who are part of the people as broad as possible. And the dialogue between Israel and diaspora, we really need all the parts of Israel side and all the parts of diaspora side. And then we wrote, after these letters of specialists in Israeli studies and the university and future non-Orthodox rabbis and so on, who wrote that Zionism is in fact this colonial ideology and we have nothing to do and we don't want. So he said that those who don't want to recognize the second part of of course they're not part of the tent, because they're not, you cannot say that they are non-Jews because they are very important Jews, but, and then we give analogy of the Soviet Union and so on. So we need some lines. We think I am for very broad thing, but only those who want to be part of the dialogue, those who declare that the other is illegitimate, and I want to build my identity without them. That's I met that I was saying We now have to build our American Jewish identity without Israel. For 1,000 years we did it without Israel. Why not today? So of course they are not part of the dialogue with Israel. But,
How do we combat it? Because as Charles has said, this is a religion and it's being imposed.
well, I'll tell you, those who want to be absolutely independent, they will be. But as I always say, their grandchildren will not be Jewish. That's what we have in history. So if it is important for them, they attempt to build today identity without Israel at all, well, that was what secular Jews discovered. What is birthrights? Two secular Jews discovered that they cannot keep their kids Jewish if they are not bringing them to Israel, at least for 10 years. That's how all this happened. So, but if a person says, I really don't care, I'm not part of this so-called Jewish civilization, then you cannot confront him. He simply goes the other way, and he is not part of the tent. But because, in fact, many of these people are doing it without thinking, and they do care, they want to stay in the tent, that's how you challenge it. But look, after all, I'm the old guy. You are young. I always said to Shlichim and Jewish agency, we cannot influence. Only you can, because it's people of your age. So you have to tell me how to influence. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Avital and then Amy.
Avital.
I want to tell you a story,
Okay.
a personal story. I was born in Argentina as like a young leader. We went to some manifestations to support the Refusenik. So let my people go. At all, we were not allowed to go to manifestations because there was a military regime. But because it was against the Soviet Union, we was allowed to do. So I really grew up about your story, your symbol. And it was very, very strong for my identity. I think for all the Jewish young people. And I want to ask you if you don't think that now young Jewish people need a symbol to increase their identity. And I want to tell you another thing. You have the best present that a man can have.
Okay.
It's Avital. I told her a few minutes ago, she was and she is my personal hero. Because
What is the question?
between Zionism and love and identity is the best thing you can have.
I agree with you fully. What is the question?
I asked you about the symbol, the need of the symbol.
Look, again, symbols, modern symbols have to be created by younger people. But I really believe that that's big mistake somehow of Jewish people, of America and others, that they they ignored their own biggest success in the modern history. After all, the fact that 2 million Jews left Soviet Union and more than 1 million lives in Israel and 600,000 or 500,000 in America and other places, that was huge victory of the world Jewry. And I'm always asking when people come to me and say, well, can you tell to our grandchildren the story? I say, but do your grandchildren know your story? You were the one who was marching, and you were coming to Moscow and was hiding in your underwear the documents, our letter to Senator Jackson. So, and your grandchildren know nothing about it. So I do believe when in Jewish schools they are looking hardly for the heroes, and they go to Maccabim and the King David and Neely, I don't know, and don't speak about their own story. It's a pity. So yes, these symbols are somehow lost. But look, if you really want to excite young people, you have to find symbols in today's life. And I'm not even using Twitter, so I cannot do that.
Thank you. Amy?
I'd like to echo Evital's comments and say that Never Alone provided me with insight into how it is that you arrived at thinking of the world with such clarity.
Okay.
You commented in that work that these are your words, that you've lived life backwards.
Yeah.
And in living life backwards, and for those who've not read, it gives the example of having been circumcised much later in life, not having a bar mitzvah until 65. These are living life backwards examples.
And going first to prison and then to politics.
Yes. My question for you is that in living life backwards in an age that I find so regressive, if you could provide us insight, if you dare, into the future, aside from saying that things will get worse, because the clarity that you offer provides us, I think, insights on how to fight back. You specifically also mentioned how you've changed your perspective over time. And I'm wondering if there's one big shift in your consciousness that you would like to share with us about how we might shift our own perspectives about what's in front of us right
now. Well, I believe that my most important insight, which only was becoming more and more strong with time, is that people have two basic, very deep desires. The desire to be independent, that nobody will tell me what to think. My daughter in the age of 4 said, "You will not tell me what to do." And that's very normal for the feeling of the people that they want to have independent thinking. And so freedom of choice is very important. And the second one is desire to belong to something bigger than you, which is almost opposite desires, to be individual and to belong to them. And the problem that in the world that we lived, and especially today we live, these two desires are turning us apart. Really. And you can see this all postmodernism in Europe, and now, and on the other hand, the dictatorship in the third world, and all extreme nationalism, which is fighting against desire of people to be free, or to the contrary, extreme freedom without borders, and to live the life where there is nothing to die for. So the full life, the real feeling that you have full life, is only when these two things are connected together. And that's what I discovered and became activist of Zionist movement, human rights movement, and that's what I see as the biggest challenge in the modern world today, that instead of bringing to people the fullness of life by coming together, it goes apart. And that's why suddenly it looks like regress, that the future is, in America, many polls, not polls, studies show that people feel that today is better than tomorrow. Yeah? If you look in Israel, like 70% say that in America that today is better than tomorrow. In Israel, 70% say that tomorrow will be better than today. And you know why? Because Israel, with all, is Jewish democratic state. They are working very hard to be part of the free world and to be Jewish state. And some European leaders are saying, only because you insist to be Jewish, that's why we have all the problems. And on the other hand, they're part of the Middle East, we have no choice, and we insist to be a democratic state, but of course it's against tradition. But that's what gives this feeling of fullness of life. And that's why Israel, by the way, not only Jews, but Arabs, are so optimistic. And that's why, by the way, they are bringing more children to the world than any free society today in the world. It's very closely connected to this optimism. And I believe the reason for this optimism is that somehow, in spite of all the difficulties, we're trying to keep these two deep desires together, while unfortunately, the world continues to look how to sacrifice one for the sake of the other. Okay.
Thank you. Tyrone, and then Gabi.
Okay. Short question, but I want to give you some examples, my context for clarity. The black community and black intelligentsia have typically produced a few explanations for racism against black people. We can talk about religiously, white people are the devil, or there's demonic spirits, so on, that's religiously. Like, from an anthropological standpoint, we can point to Cheikh Anta Diop, two cradle theory, dividing the southern and northern hemisphere. Northern people come from more northern areas where hunters and gatherers, and they're not used to sharing, and so there's power differentials and all that kind of different stuff. And I can even talk about stuff like in America that has different reasons, Bacon's Rebellion, financial, economic stuff, whatever. Can you, since you've been doing this for so long and you've seen so much, is there any insight you have for such widespread of anti-Semitism? Maybe that's a very complicated or I don't know, but I just want to see.
Well, I don't know, but I tell you what I do know. Martin Luther King, I think, was one of the most outstanding, amazing leaders of black people, bringing them to freedom, to equality. Today, when there was written the course for study in California, Martin Luther King, written by there were many black people involved in this. Martin Luther King was not there. Malcolm X was there, and of course Black Lives Matter was there, and so on. And even Black Panthers were there. But why? Because Martin Luther King wanted to make black people part of the society. Demanding from the society to accept them as their equal part. Today's theories are how to destroy the society because it's the society of oppressors. In the Soviet Union, this first Gymnon International was, we will destroy all this world to the end, and then we will bring our new world. And I feel that it's like the same philosophy today. And that's why Martin Luther King, from the real hero and the leader and the moral voice and believer, I didn't meet him, he was killed before I was released, but I did meet many Jews who were working for him, his lawyers, who were with him in this busing in Atlanta and so. And they were first of all, they themselves how admired and how proud they were to be part of it, and how this person was fighting to change his country in order to become equal in this country. So the fact that today, and it's also part of this Marxist philosophy, that the idea is how we make this country politically non-correct as a country. And that's why we need that Jefferson is, and Wilson, everybody is bad. And I think it makes major disservice to black people, because from the beginning they, instead of thinking how to use the power of America, they think how to deprive America of its power. And why it is becoming so popular? Well, maybe because you don't have such great leaders like Martin Luther King. I don't know. I'm not enough inside to know. I can judge only from outside what's really happening.
So we're running out of time. So
no, but this girl, no, was praying for, begging.
She's on the list. I'm trying. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to integrate some people who haven't been able to.
Yeah, I have all the time in the world. He's a bad guy.
So we have a few minutes. So Gabi, then Asher, then Romy, then Noah.
Mr. Sharansky, Kol HaKavod, it's an honor. Thank you so much. Growing up in the U.S., my family, we supported you very much, and Scoop Jackson and Fetch Moynihan. As a child, too, I thought Scoop Jackson was Jewish. So
you also.
Also Moynihan, but anyway. More recently, you wrote an article just about 2 years ago in Newsweek, 3 warning signs of ideological totalitarianism.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how it relates to your talk today, to our subject today of anti-Semitism. There you outlined the problem of guilt by association. You're either with us or against us. Secondly, truth by association, the rejection of dialogue, so that we fail the town square test. Can everyone express themselves freely without fear of punishment? And third, and maybe most important these days, double think. Or what I would call thinking by disassociation, splitting thought and speaking, or what we call self-censorship, which goes on in the university, among other places. We have our apparatchiks there too, from administrators to colleagues, even to students who all work together to create an environment in which any dissent from political correctness or wokeness, call it what you want, cultural Marxism, is really dangerous, and people sort of tend to decide it's not worth it after a while. Can you connect your thoughts about totalitarianism these days to our problem of anti-Semitism, or maybe even just say a bit more about this other topic that you...
Okay, look, on this topic, and I mentioned it a little bit, my progressive critical theories remind me of Marxism, but I add one more point, it's doublethink, and I wrote another article, by the way, about doublethink in the Soviet Union. First of all, I'm not comparing totalitarian regime with democracy. America is very deeply developed democracy, and I don't think that any attempts to remove Lincoln or Martin Luther King from the history will not help in the end. But just because it is so important that for the free world that America will be the society believing in human rights and defending human rights, that's why even small signs are alarming. And one of these signs, I really see that people start being afraid to express their views. And that was the daily life in Soviet Union, and they wrote a lot about it, how it was the daily life, how from the age of 5 I started doublethink. I will not go into it. But the fact that in America, more and more people, and there are studies which show that more than half of Americans prefer not to say openly what they think or for whom they voted in public. I believe that's a very alarming sign for, first of all, for Americans. I can say, I will not say exactly the group, but I'm speaking to the group of Jewish people, and I'm asking if they have the problem of not speaking open on the university. And they say, no, really, we don't have. Then after the meeting is finished, some people came to me and said that their grandfather is from the Soviet Union, and he is really said that it's very alarming what's happening. It reminds him so. And as a result, he and his son, or his father probably, voted for Trump. I said, and are you talking about it? He said, no, this group, I will never say it. In this group that just now spoke how freely they civil, I will never say it publicly because it will change all the life of my family for much worse in my community. So that's a simple example, but that's what's happening everywhere. And I think if you are against Trump, you should make sure that people who voted for Trump will not feel any need to not to speak publicly, and vice versa, of course. And the very fact that I don't remember that when American Jews were coming to us in Moscow, that they had any problem to speak about their views, even if these views were very much against the mainstream. So I think it's relatively new phenomenon, and especially in the academy, that there are so many young people who prefer not to express their views in the academy, and there are more and more professors who are not invited or disinvited from the because their views are incorrect. I think it's a very alarming sign. Okay.
Thanks. So Usher, very concisely.
Yeah, totally. And this, you talk about freedom of speech. I'm interested in asking about academic freedom of speech. There might be overlap. If there's any redundancy, then we can totally move on. But thank you so much for being here. It's absolutely unbelievable to meet authors in person. It's always an unbelievable experience. So I go to UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina College. And there's this incident where an anti-Zionist professor was teaching a class, and the Israeli government got involved. I don't know if you heard about it. They sent a minister over. It was a whole little controversy. But anyway, my professors supported this as a pillar of freedom of speech. This person was finally speaking out against Israel. At the same time, obviously, that sounds to me like because of the academic taboo to be Zionist, the opposite of freedom of speech to some extent. So I wanted to ask about the state of academic freedom of speech in the academy, especially because we know that Zionism, Nazism was kind of a product of academic thoughts. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that.
Well, but I think I already answered. Look, it started, I think, I discovered it when in Brandeis University, they canceled, they were going to give like honorary professor, I think, to there. And I knew her personally, but she was in Europe, in the underground, being afraid that she will be killed. So I asked the leader, I am also honorary doctor of Brandeis University. And they explained me that they're afraid that it will have it will be felt very negative, and there will be demonstrations, and the university can lose a lot of their support and so on. It was probably 15 years ago. First time, and I was really surprised because after all, it's Brandeis University. But then it became like normal, and there are more and more and more people who are disinvited to speak. And there are, as a result, there are more and more students who decide not to speak publicly on their views. So I personally believe it's one of the most alarming things which is happening in America, even more alarming than some extreme of Black Lives Matter, because that's really the heart of America. That's from where all the future political leaders are coming, and so that's very dangerous. Yeah.
I'm going to collect two questions. So very briefly, Noah and then Roman.
Thank you so much. Natan Sharansky.
Okay.
Sure. Last time when we met in Jerusalem, we talked a lot about Jewish identity and our position. And I would like to use this opportunity to ask you, please, something a bit more practical. What is the role of non-Jewish actors in the Jewish fight against anti-Semitism? I mean, because historically, of course, sought the alliance of non-Jewish actors because they were the only ones who were listened to, and Jews in their own agency were not. But you are, of course, dogma mofet le-Zionism as its best and democracy. But if I remember correctly, you, together with Avital, have collaborated and gained the support of the Western world before and after '86. So what I wanted to ask you is, how do we work with the big wide world? How do we explain to them what to us is obvious, what we take for granted, about the mutating elements of timeless anti-Semitism? And do we approach them with rationality and facts, or do we need to seek their sympathy? I hope this question is clear. Thank you.
Well, it's always to have sympathy, and for this you have to explain 1,000 years of history, yeah? But in the end, it's personal interest. And I believe, and that's what Charles was quoting Elie Wiesel all the time, that it starts with Jews and never finishes with the Jews. And Jews were so many times in history the canary, meaning the first who warns about future problems. And that's the main reason why non-Jewish world has to be concerned, what it really means for the society, where it will take. And the fact that some elements of Black Lives Matter are anti-Semitic, maybe that has to concern Jews. But as a result, where they are taking American society, that has to be of concern for American society. That, I think, without thinking together with them how dangerous it is for the society in general, it will be very difficult to get their support. But I have to say, I really am proud to, on the very early stages of our struggle, to build some bridges. Like Father Drainer was a great Catholic member of Congress. And then Pope didn't permit him to continue in politics, so he was very active in Catholic. And he came to us to Moscow, and we became very friendly. And it was so clear for him how dangerous it is for the world that Soviet Union is anti-Semitic. So that's the best sign of totalitarian threat of Soviet Union to the West. So I believe that must be mutual interest. Yeah.
Thanks. I want to ask you, I'm going to intervene before how do you see Black Lives Matter? Because in a sense, I'm going to push back a little bit. There was sort of an organic outrage of racism in the United States and police brutality that I think cut across the United States, the African American community or communities, and the wider society, especially among young people, and they were outraged. And I think that was something organic. And yet there is an official Black Lives Matter organization that was actually working with the Nation of Islam and sort of using Israel and Jewish people as a scapegoat. But I perceive that as an extreme element of an organic movement that swept the United States. How do you see Black Lives Matter is it a social movement? Does it represent the extreme left and the Nation of Islam? Or I see there's a lot of good people fighting for justice.
Look, again, I'm not an expert in this. I never sat with the leaders of Black Lives Matter and argued with them, though I think we argued through the press a lot. No, I have no doubt that among Black Lives Matter, there is probably a lot of good people who are very angry when what's happening. Exactly, there are many very good Jews whom I know personally who felt themselves obliged to go and to participate in the demonstration of Black Lives Matter. But at the same time, it's enough to compare what such thing as George Floyd, what Martin Luther King would have been doing, and his reaction on segregation of the buses, and how he was doing, and how he was quite brought to the Civil Act, what is it, 1964, and what is the leaders of Black Lives Matter doing with the death of George Floyd, and not to understand. And as a result, they came to this Deathly Encounter series and all the other series, which are bringing a lot of hatred against America. And that is the difference.
Also, as a footnote, I remember also during the time of the murder of George Floyd, ISGAP with you and I and Dennis signed a letter. We actually closed for 2 days as a form of protest against what was happening. So ISGAP actually closed its offices for 2 days. With you. Okay, Romy, we're over time, so very
quick. Natan, it's a real honor to listen to you today. I wanted to ask you more about the situation in Russia and Ukraine. I know it's a sensitive issue, but with Sergei Lavrov calling Zelensky and Ukrainians Nazis, and also the situation for Russian Jewry today, the issue with the Jewish agency and that.
Well, look, that's the whole big topic.
I know.
I will only tell. It's very difficult for Jews to believe that there can be a major conflict and it's not about Jews. But I have to say, the attempts to accuse Ukraine in anti-Semitism are absolute nonsense. But also the attempts to accuse Putin in anti-Semitism is also nonsense. It's about Putin who decided that he is big enough and great enough to continue the line from Peter the Great to Stalin and to restore Soviet empire. And as a result, it's absolutely barbaric aggression against Ukraine. But no doubt, by the way, at the same time, it's a lot of repression inside the country. In a few months, Russia went back practically in every aspect to old Soviet Union, freedom of speech, freedom of organization, so on, except from one, freedom of immigration. It still exists. And no doubt, society will become more anti-Semitic because it's much less liberal and democratic, and so it will come. But it started, and this awful war is not because of Jews. It's very difficult to accept that it's so.
So on that note, so on behalf of everybody here in Natan, thank you for all your contributions.